this talk is about bridging the gap between business and development, customer journey mapping. And it actually started with customer journey mapping, but it's ended to be a much more powerful thing. And most of you know me, but for anybody listening to this for the first time, I wanted to give a little background. I've been in the Agile space since before it was called Agile. I mean, there was a space that we were trying to figure out what to call it. And that was, I think it started in sometime in 99. I was an attendee at what was called Snowbird 10, the 10-year anniversary of the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. It was called Snowbird 10 because Snowbird was the ski resort that the Manifesto for Agile Software Development was created. I was invited because I was one of the principals in expanding what Kanban, having formed Lean Kanban University with David Anderson. He was also there. I've been around a lot, mostly Net Objectives from 1999 to 2019, was acquired by the PMI, built the discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant, left there about 2 years ago, a little more. And I've been actually spending the last 2 years consolidating what I learned there and extending it based on what I've learned that I didn't put in the DABC and stuff I've learned since. I have a lot of learning journeys. I'll talk about them a little bit at the end. But if you want to accelerate kind of what you're doing here, those would be a great way for you to do it. Now, our agenda is basically this. I want to talk a little bit about the challenge, some key concepts, what's needed from the business side, and then what's needed from development, and how to bridge the gap. Now, what's important here is to recognize that you can't just do product management or decomposition of things in isolation, although that's usually how it's done. It's not a good way to do it. So I'm going to be talking about how to do it in kind of a more fulfilled way. And it also addresses 3 of the 4 biggest, I'll say mostly missing, because not everybody misses them, but certainly SAFe and Scrum miss them. Theory of Constraints has quite a lot of this. Tame Flow by Steve Tendon. There are others, Peter Merrill's Xscale. But I'm talking about the main ones are missing, and there are some other people who have them in, but it's isolated. And these are basically systems thinking, first principles of knowledge work, which we've talked about before, value stream management, minimum business increments. The bolded ones I'll be touching on, not going into great depth, but they're very important and they're missing. And I personally think, it's not me personally thinking, I have a lot of evidence that shows that most of the challenges that occur in organizations, both at the team and at the organization level, are because these are missing. People have substituted complexity thinking for systems thinking. They are different, in my opinion, in knowledge work. It's not a good move. Value stream management is alluded to, but mostly ignored. And the concept of MBIs is out there, but there's not a name for it. And when you don't talk about it, don't have a name for it, it gets very confusing. Okay, so there are some key concepts to add. And this is kind of how I look at it. We want to get to success. It requires everything. And the business is at one point, we need MBI's full kitting. It's actually part of the MBI, but it's a separate concept from theory constraints. And the customer journey, I could talk about that as missing. So I said the foremost, not all of them. So critical stakeholder values, that's also something not talked too much about. What is their success criteria? When I say critical stakeholder values, this is also typically, the people are deciding where we go. What are their strategies? What are the constraints? Minimum viable products, often misconstrained. I like Eric Ries's approach to them, not the watered down approach. That just means anything to verify something is valuable. These must be supplied by key stakeholders in product management to development. They often aren't. By the way, a key thing here, when I say development, I mean both IT and non-IT development. A lot of times you can make value, add a lot of value without software at all, without any kind of IT. I've seen it done. Particularly in process management of some type of work, like maybe serving food, actually hospitals in ER. I've seen some amazing ones that literally have cut out the wait time by, the wait time's like a third of what it used to be. And they didn't do any new things with the software. They just literally physically rearranged things and changed their workflow. So I might talk about IT a little bit. Some of the things may relate to IT. But everything I talk about here can work for non-IT as well. So we kind of want to start with who's driving the ship, which is the executives, the key stakeholders who have our funding. Now you say, well, don't we start with the customer? And the answer is no. You start with what's the purpose of the company, then you look for your customers. Who are the customers we're satisfying? What's the market we're in? But you have this vision of the organization, then you can have a PMO, not the way it's often done, but I mean, who's deciding on the initiatives to take, product management, development, IT, not IT, as I mentioned, other parts of the organization, ops. And of course, this isn't everything. That's why I have an other. So if I left it out, put it in other. By other, I mean kind of marketing, documentation, any ancillary aspect of things. Now, what we want to do though is look at the relationships between all these to the customer. And because systems are actually defined more by the relationships between the pieces, not the pieces themselves. And what's interesting to note is that each of these has a different relationship to the customer uh, than the others. They're all kind of different. Like they might decide in our target market, how are we going to sell it, market it, support our customers, what does operation need? You know, we got to attend to the customer journey. That's how the customers get their work done. We have to look at what value is needed, and we have to see which initiative we do. So this is an important thing that people in the organization tend to look at the customer differently. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. That's important. You can't look at every aspect individually. And this is perhaps one of the dilemmas, because since you can't look at it all, which means you have to have different groups looking at different things, the question becomes, how do they work together? And then you've got to ask the question, or I'm asking it ahead of time. It's really, what do people have to provide everybody? But I'm focusing on the development area. So I'll say, what are the critical values? You know, what's required to support it? This is what you have to provide to the development out of what you're looking at the customer. You know, they have to coordinate with ops to release the product. So there's a lot of information. It's a two-way street between each of these. Now, I don't mean to imply that everything is looking at the customer and then centered around development. I really, in a sense, I could have diagrams for each one of these, because there's a relationship between each of these hexagons to every other hexagon. I'm just trying to focus on this. So be clear, this is a focus, this is a subset of things. Okay. We've got to look at the relative importance of things. Now I'm going to quickly go over this. I'll put a reference later when we release the talk, more depth on the value stream, but I want to remind people about the value stream. You know, we're normally organized hierarchically. The idea then is we get efficient at every step. This seems to be a good idea, because the theory is, it's wrong theory, but it is a theory, that if we make every step faster, then the whole thing is faster. This is a perfect example of local optimization that leads to slower global results. This is what Lean really demonstrated, oh, I don't know, back in the late 40s, early 50s, that this is a misunderstanding of things. It also encourages big batches, which is worse, creates delays in feedback, causes too much work in process. And an example is what happens if a mistake happens here and it isn't discovered until later. Well, there's all that waste created and problems. Plus now we basically also upset the system that comes after this. So we always have these cascaded projects, and one, when it goes wrong, impacts others dramatically. So there's a huge amount of waste. And this trade-off between local efficiency and eliminating waste is a big one. The local efficiency of each silo may actually go down as we improve the global efficiency. We have to attend to this and recognize the time saved is much greater than the cost. We don't want to speed up the local steps. We want to avoid creating waste. This is really the concept of flow and lean and theory of constraints. We don't speed up the local steps. We look at the whole. By going faster the local steps, you're delaying feedback, which causes more waste, and it has this cascading effect, as I mentioned. We can see this better when we notice that the nature of our work is it doesn't work in this hierarchy, but it cuts across. The red dashes just show that I'm getting management approval, not any real value may be created. The value created comes from going across the organization. So, you know, this is really our issue. We're trying to get this time to market from when we start it until it gets back to well, here I've got it shown the top of the hierarchy, but then release to the customer. This is the value stream. Value streams are not defined, they're observed, and you can improve them with a focus on the customer. So I put that in here to show this is what we're trying to do. Value streams start with the customer in mind and end when the customer consumes value. We have to look at the customer. But true innovation often does not come from the customer giving us a solution. It often comes from either us perceiving a problem the customer is having, or sometimes they tell us they're having. I can think of several things I did in the 80s and 90s when I was building a lot of vertical software, and I would listen to what their challenges were. But sometimes they had no clue how to fix them. That was my job. Sometimes they had clues that were wrong, but I knew what their problems were, and they're easy to observe. So the real problem is we're organized one way, we go another way, and who's managing the value? Usually nobody. So the benefit of recognizing the impact of silos, that we do this, is that silos slow down. When we recognize this, and then we see all this, is we can actually solve this problem of siloing. But we have to see it. If we don't see it, it's going to be a problem. Edgar Schein remarks that we don't think and talk about what we see what we are able to think and talk about. Because systems thinking, because value stream management is not done much. It's not even mentioned in a lot of places. We don't see it, we don't do it, we don't fix it. So the benefit is we can stop inflicting all these delays. We can eliminate the frustration of silos not working together. Now, we want to make a shift basically from this to this, where we get feedback at every step of the way. That is our goal. That is what we're trying to do. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, I pointed out the different pieces, and now I've laid it out as, like, you could say this is kind of like the value stream, okay? And it's centered around the customer. I laid this out because I'm going to do this kind of metaphorically, maybe with these images as I go. But what we have to recognize is we have to attend to the whole. Value streams facilitate this. I love this from Deming. I'm still a big Deming fan. I studied him in the, I don't know, late 80s. I think it was around 88. And that's when I also got introduced to the Toyota production system. And his stuff is still true. And a system must be managed. It will not manage itself. Left to themselves, components become selfish, independent profit centers and destroy the system. The secret is cooperation between components toward the aim of the organization. Now, one of the things that he also talked about is that the system causes most of the issues. He called these common cause errors as opposed to special cause errors. And it's really great. Actually, something happened just this morning. I'll relate. My wife and I have this system to help decide. We live in it's a 4-level house, but it's only two stories, really. They're just offset, so you got half levels. And I don't like her carrying a lot of stuff. So I'm the one who takes the laundry up and down, and we have a system for it. And I accidentally took 3 things down that were clean. So she was apologizing, and I was saying, honey, it's not your fault. We had a problem in the system. It wasn't your fault. And I realized that there was an ambiguity in the system. We have a convention, but it didn't work in this case. So I said, it's not your fault. The system failed us. So she, of course, laughs. Of course, it's not my fault. It's the system. But I said, but that doesn't get us off the hook. Why? Because it's up to us to fix the system. And that's what Deming means to say. We have to improve the system. That's our responsibility. If the system is bad, it's our responsibility to fix it. But we have to recognize it's the system that is causing the problems. And notice this interaction, as silly as it might have been, there wasn't any blame there. There wasn't, you did something wrong. No, the system was insufficient for this. Now, when you take that blame off, and we've learned from kids that if something goes wrong, it's your fault. You had it last, or whatever. You got to work with that psychology. It's very important. Okay, so what do I mean by the customer journey? Okay, this is basically the path the customer takes from start to finish. They often have several journeys. In a financial application, you might set up the account, buying equities, selling equities. These can all be different customer journeys, transfers, a variety of things. So when you change the system, actually, sometimes you change multiple customer journeys. It's identified by product owners typically and developers working together. Now, it's important to understand that the customer journey is not the sequence of steps the customer takes with this computer. In fact, there are things where some of it is in the system, some of it is out of the system. For example, The financial case again, I might go in, set up my account, then I got to go look for something in my filing cabinet, and then I come back and I do something. Maybe it'd be nice to have some storage of things so I don't have to go outside of the system to get the information. So the customer journey is both what's inside and outside. It's that whole line, not just what's inside. The arrows point to how our system interacts with people, but everything outside is also the customer journey. This is just an example I use to illustrate how the customer journey can impact things outside. So think of that refrigerator as the system, and you'll see it's got a door and door. The neat thing about this is you can put drinks here, and when this is closed, usually the whole thing is closed. It's just expanded to show this. You can get your drinks just by opening this. Well, what's cool about this, and no pun intended, is you can open this and you don't lose the cool inside. But what I've noticed I do now is by having this vast amount of drink capacity, because you have a lot more than you used to have, these are kind of big shelves, thick shelves, is I can buy in bulk more and have it there. And it's in my garage. So I got 3 adult kids. I guess I got four adult kids, but 3 who live in my area. So they know, hey, I can always go to dad's garage and pull out anything. I got all sorts of stuff here, and it doesn't hurt my storage. So it's changed how I work outside here. That's also the customer journey. And that's the cool thing. Most innovation actually occurs by improving the customer journey outside of the system. When you make it so their whole total job is a lot easier. Consider VisiCalc. That might be a bit dating me. That was out in the 80s. It enabled basically non-programmers to write reports on the Apple II. It was great. Otherwise, they had to go to IT to write reports, and it would take months. The customer journey of using VisiCalc cut things down that used to take months and a whole approval process down to minutes. The iPod brought together several different things: purchasing music, storing it, playing it, making playlists, all in one little device. And then it went to the phone. Now it was on a device you all had. Venmo, payment. We want to recognize true innovation typically always comes from the customer journey. We're shifting the user experience from the system to the user. See, the UX as it is now is really the user's experience of the stupid expletive deleted system, okay, because we're not looking at it. Now, a minimum business increment, which I will talk about in a couple minutes, a minimum business increment, that which you're going to implement, that which you're going to deliver and have them consume, can involve several customer journeys. In other words, if I make a change to one thing, remember this list, I might add a feature that affects all these, even though they're separate customer journeys. So we have to be aware of that. Okay. Here's one of the problems. Business does not always provide all of what development requires, and development comes from the perspective of improving the system. Now, this should not be that surprising. People work the way they like to work. Developers, for the most part, like to think about building a system. It's what got them excited about software. They're building systems. And unless you give them something to look at other than the system, that's where they're going to come from. So part of the issue here is, how do we create a system, an environment, so people can see everything? How do we get not so much them talking to each other directly as much as an environment, a system, as I've talked about? Remember, the system causes most of all of our errors. How do we do this? Well, before I get there, I do have to talk about MVPs and MBI. So I'm going to do that quickly, and then I'll show you. And it's surprisingly simple. It really just requires this shift of perspective I've already talked about. Shift to the value stream, shift to the customer journey. And then this technique I've had for a while, actually just, wow, it really fits. So MVPs, I'm using not the definition originated with Frank Robinson. His was good. I liked it. His is not unlike what we now call minimum business increments, but we didn't get MBIs from him. I like MVPs from Eric Ries because it's the smallest functionality can be given to select customers, but it's more than that. It's about examining assumptions. Now, the Lean Startup's a brilliant book on Lean. My only complaint is he does such a better job than me. And he's good looking besides, which makes it an insult to injury. But other than that, it's a great book. This book, though, is phenomenal. Because in this book, you realize he projects and he talks about some case studies where what it's really about is all assumptions. How is the market going to take us? What are our assumptions on how we're going to promote it? What is our assumptions on how we're going to support it? a lot of it has nothing to do with the product itself. And I just love this book. I just think it's totally brilliant. I read them both. I would read them both, but this is, if you had one, I'd read The Startup Way. It's really brilliant. Okay, they're typically built by a small team, and therefore being built by a small team, they have different issues than when you're doing the releases. What's important to recognize is that we're just taking a thin slice. Now, SAFe has misappropriated the term. So if you hear MVP and SAFe, don't talk to me about, well, SAFe says this. I'm going to say they blew it. They redefined it. It's just so bastardized to be almost useless now. It's kind of irritating. Okay, minimum business increment is the smallest increment of value we can deliver to the customer that is worth the transaction cost of doing so. Sometimes you could deliver something, but you'll delay it because there's a cost to the customer consuming it, or possibly to you releasing it. Now you should lower the cost of release, but the consumption of the customer sometimes is something you don't have much control. It's right size. Think about it. Features like fast forward on a DVD is too small to release if you don't have fast reverse. Okay. Epics contain things that are just too big. You're not going to do the whole epic, at least in the way SAFe defines them. So MBIs are kind of the right size. It's not about doing less. It's what can you deliver soonest. That's the idea. And its heritage comes from the minimum marketable feature of software by numbers. We changed the name not to distinguish our version from theirs, although ours is different. It builds on it. It's kind of like more stuff added, which we'll see in a minute. It's because not everybody markets, not everybody does features. So we found the name minimum marketable feature to limit our business. Literally, people would say, well, we're not marketing. We don't have features like that. But a minimum business increment, that could be anything. It's just the next thing you deliver fastest. Again, MMF and SAFe, they use it in Lean UX. Lean UX doesn't mention anything. They've again bastardized the term, so ignore that. Okay. MBIs enable alignment because a sequence of MBIs can be used to manifest an initiative. Implementing the initiative this way gives you can get it out in the market. And alignment is better than coordination. You need always some coordination, but the more alignment you have, the less coordination you need. I'm just putting this here for reference. I will present a PDF of this talk for people in the ACOP like y'all are, but I'm not going to go through it. But there are some differences between the two, like discovering if it's viable, getting a return on investment. Here you're learning, here you're building. MBIs, I've got to do another talk on this because it's kind of, what can I say, irritating. Yes, we do not know the end result of a product we're building, but the details have to emerge, but you should be able to do it without much waste and without huge amounts of experience, and certainly not in how you're working. But there's so much focus on this, oh, we've got to try and fail fast and run experiments. And that's because we're missing these 4 critical concepts I talked about. So what I want to do in a nutshell, some of this information, I've just kind of put this up to remember the diagrams with we're trying to say we need to get information, we need to have development do it. And this creates the context for development, okay? We need to decompose MVPs and MBIs while attending to the customer journey. That's the basic premise. We need this concept called full kitting, which means you're prepared to do it. This has been, again, another kind of disbandment. Definition of ready has been chastised in the Agile space because it has been used as a phase gate. They say, well, we can't go forward until we have a definition of ready. Well, the problem there is you can't go forward. Not that you need a definition of ready. I mean, phase gating is bad, but definition of ready and being prepared isn't. So I want to talk about that. Basically, you need to create a checklist of risks and assumptions. And this is basically what the board is that I'm currently building in Miro. That may change, but I mean, in a collaborative virtual board system, it'll be in that. And what's important, I'll go quickly through this and then I'll show how it fits in the context of everything. So we start with an MBI MVP, what we're going to be kind of building or creating. And some of this may look like Jeff Patton's story mapping. I will say what actually happened here is we didn't come from his system and make this. What actually happened is we had another way of doing MBI decomposition. And we added at the end of it, patent story mapping to take things down we define to get into stories. And then I realized, no, we should add that, but integrate it into the bigger picture of what we're doing with Amplio, our system. And the idea is this: we start with the MBI or the MVP because it'll work both ways. We look at the targeted customer journey and we look at their steps. Some steps are with our system, some steps are outside of our system, as I mentioned. The best systems actually usually reduce this and don't add a lot here. We, of course, will see what features we have. We'll have stories. Some stories we'll discover aren't needed by the MBI. In other words, we might have this task we're trying to do, and we say, oh, but we're not going to Europe yet, so we don't need European tax laws. So we'll put that down here. This is the other cool thing about MBIs. A lot of things we're considering doing don't need to be done in the first release. By identifying this is what we're building, it's in the market of, say, non-European at the times, or non-Asian too, just US or, things of that nature. We can, when we decompose, we can determine if we need it or not. So anything we pull out and put down here is we don't have to build yet. We'll get what we do need to build. And then what we're doing is we're not only building, this was the first step, we're not only building within the context of the MBI and MVP, one or the other. That's useful. But now remember these other people outside of us, sorry for the animations in the wrong order, but we have what are the execs telling us. Now I don't have it on this sheet, it gets a little complicated, but on the working board, you have what did they provide us? What did they provide us? What did they provide us? So when we're building this, we have what's called line of sight. In other words, we see why this MBI fits the strategy. We see how this is prioritized against the PMO. We see the factors that product management is telling us. We're not doing this in isolation. Doing it in isolation is a local optimization technique and misses systems thinking. Now, it doesn't mean we are really super attending to this all the time, but at least we can see it. And seeing it is very important. Line of sight's critical. I see all the time people chastise users of Scrum saying they become feature factories. That's not what Scrum's supposed to do. Well, I don't care what it's supposed to do. What does it do? I'm a big believer in looking at evidence. Inspect and adapt means you have to look at everything, whether you like it or not. When people understand the why, several things happen. You get alignment. You get building just what's needed, not extra stuff. You offer options that make sense to the business. Development can adjust the strategy, but they always have to live within it. In other words, it's not just following rules, things like that. And one thing to look at as a coach, this is a really big tip for a coach. When everybody has the problem, it's not the problem of everybody. That's the essence of looking at common cause errors. Okay, so I mentioned full kitting. So let me give a definition for this. This is summarized in Goldratt's Rules of Flow by his daughter, Efrat Goldratt Eshlag. It doesn't come from this book, but it's a good summary. This is a good book. It's a quick read. I mean, you can read it in a few hours. It gives you a nice overview, not of TOC, but of using it in product development. It's very nice. It's created by both development and other parts. It's a checklist of all the elements that are necessary to complete a task, project, or other work. This is good for products or for projects, same thing. You don't start working until you verify everything is there. It's like if you were going to do a paint job of a room, you wouldn't start with without all the things. You need a ladder, you need tape, you need paint, you need paintbrushes, you need a pan for the ink, you need a floor mat or whatever you're going to do. You don't start with some of that because otherwise you get halfway in and then you have to leave. Okay, this should be part of the definition of ready, not as a phase gate, but as a way of avoiding getting started too early. See, this is the weird thing. We tend to start too early to get it in there. People complain about all this time, but then they don't talk about a definition of ready. So that's an important thing. That's an important thing to do. MBIs must be fully kitted. I joke, not fully kitten. I'm a cat person if you haven't figured that out. It's a checklist of all the things that are needed. It's not enough to build functionality to deliver. It's insufficient to do that. We must include all the functionality and support. This is where full kitting comes in. What are all these pieces? There's another thing. I'm not going to talk about this here, but you can imagine you got to look at your risks and assumptions. the preliminary work looking at all these pieces outside need to include this. Now, I highlight business architecture, technical architecture, and ops and support because that's where most of this is. But what we really need to also do is come up with these other pieces. What's the definition of done? How do we provide a support view? This is somewhat needs to be created as part of the customer mapping. Okay. So it says working together creates alignment. Development can work the best way within the constraints and goals of the organization. And it's important to recognize this is not top down. This choice is, I hear, between bottom up, which gives you a poor design. You do not build systems by putting the pieces together that are preformed. The idea that you're going to get agile teams each working in the same way, I don't care if it's Scrum or Kanban in the same way, it's not effective. This is basically the message from Christopher Alexander's Timeless Way of Building, which I read, I don't know how long ago, like 25 plus years ago, and have seen it work everywhere. I've not seen any exceptions to this design technique. And it totally flips things. You've got to design in a cohesive manner. And the approach, it's not top down either, because that's now adding structure in a way that forces people to do things. It should be centered around value streams because that takes this holistic view. Systems thinking and value streams are essential, just mostly ignored, which is just tragic. Now, I want to talk about something that you probably hoped I talked about that I'm intentionally not talking about is how do you do this? I'm trying to create in this talk the need for something like this. But actually, if you look at this picture and you think about it, it becomes a template for how you can do this. Put what's necessary for the things outside. We'll map out your targeted journey, come up with your features, break those down into stories, throw them down there. It's not hard at all. The cool thing is in my other learning journeys, this is a board that well, not all of them, but like in the Amplo Development Masterclass and in the Amplo Consultant Educators Program, it's something that is given. Okay, so I'm going to close this. Just let me end this, and then I'll start another recording for the questions. But the next session we're going to have is January 3rd, 8 a.m. That's 2 weeks. But it's not going to be a presentation because, there'd be no time to promote it. So the next presentation will be January 17th at 8 a.m. What I'm going to do, though, is have it be a bit of going over the self-study and certification. Some of you have noticed how the format on Thinkific changed. Basically, what I'm intending to do is every week there'll be something to study. Okay. Even over the Christmas break, I'm going to add, well, maybe not next week, but I'm going to add something else this week. And the intention is if you go through those lessons and learn, you will learn a lot of stuff. I mean, not quite as much as, or as fast anyway, as some of my other programs, but quite a large amount. There is a certification program. Now, if you don't want to pay anything, that's fine. You just won't get the certification, but I'll teach it all to you about what certification is at what I call Amplio Foundations, which are basically first principles, some guidance from that, factors for effective value streams, a few other things will be presented. And there'll be boards out there where you can work. The people who do enter the certification program. So this is not something you get at the end. This is something you join as a program. For 195, you work in cohorts, work together, it accelerates. You could, of course, create your own cohorts. That's not a problem at all. I did want to point out, if you're trying to jump up and leapfrog coaches, the Amplio Value Coach starts again. I have it as a rotating cycle. It's a 6-month program. We have 8 2-hour sessions, 2 sessions a week. So it takes a month to get through what I call the content, but then it keeps going for 5 more months. It also includes Dr. Zinn sessions. Once a week, you get to ask questions and we work with them. But what's most important about the Value Coach, and it's based on this book that's going to be released in the next few days, at least a preliminary copy, is it really talks about things I've not seen anywhere. In the 80s, I was very involved in the personal development movement as kind of a support person. But I really saw that you need to know how people interact and learn and think, and there's a lot there that can be done. I'm not talking about transforming people or coaching them, but there are a lot of insights, and we do a lot of that there. If you're a consultant and want to get better, the Amplo Consultant Educator Program It's $9.95 for 6 months, 2 sessions a week, plus the doctor is in. One session is I present content. The other session is actually we work together on something. I think those are even better than when I present, because if they're helping me with some cutting edge thing, and there's huge learning in that. If your company needs to improve things, contact me also about Scrum. I haven't got it up here, but I'm announcing an Amplio Scrum, which is Scrum basically with all these things added. Okay, so thanks for being here. Hang on.